Okay, so everyone, so now we're going to dive into the heart of really working with private clients. This is what we've got to decipher. What are the client's goals and what is their risk tolerance? And most likely what we're going to find, they have a lot of goals and they may conflict. So we're going to have to prioritize these things. We're going to really have to use both our technical and soft skills to really zero in on what those client goals are. And remember risk tolerance. Private wealth, it is ability to bear risk and willingness to bear risk. It is both. We have to define both. Okay, and again, if this were institutions, we're not so much worried about willingness to bear risk. But with individuals, we need both ability to bear risk and willingness to bear risk. Okay, so how are we going to formulate these client goals and risk tolerance? Well, that's our job. We're going to help our clients formulate, and this is the most important thing, prioritize their financial goals. They may not be able to do everything they want. Again, think of constrained optimization. Sure, I'd love to buy all sorts of things, but I run out of money. Same thing with everybody. Yes, I want my son to go to college. Yes, I want to be a philanthropist. Yes, I want to pay off this and this and this, but sometimes we don't have all those choices. Okay, so a private client's financial goals, we're going to say they can be categorized really in this 30,000 foot level, but I want you to zero in on this. I think it's really helpful, and I really like where the Institute is going with this material. So we have plan goals, and then what we've added, unplanned goals. So for plan goals, we all know about plan goals. I want Tyler to go to school. I want my wife to have a comfortable retirement. I want to have a comfortable retirement. But where the CFA really shines, I think, in this material, let's talk about unplanned goals. Unfortunately, in the last 2 years, both of my wife's parents have passed, and now my father is in his 8th year of Alzheimer's. So guess what? When you think of unplanned goals, one of the things that you have to really think about, it's going to be health. That's primarily what the biggest issue is. And what we're finding, especially as clients are getting older, yes, we're living longer, but we're having more severe health issues. I promise you, my father didn't plan for 8 years of Alzheimer's expenses. Most people don't. We need to start thinking about unplanned, just as important as planned. But the problem is these are unpredictable. If my dad knew he was going to get Alzheimer's at 68, we could have planned for it, but we didn't. Normally, he was also got early onset Alzheimer's, so he even got it much younger than most people. So again, I want you to think about plan goals where we all spend a lot of our time in, but I want you to bring in unplanned goals. So these health, and oftentimes this is also expenses too. My wife and I just recently bought a new house, and we were house looking. We found this beautiful home, and we went there and it had a cedar roof. Well, it turned out the cedar roof was bad, and it was $40,000 to $50,000 to replace the roof. I didn't like the house so much after that. So that's what I need to think about. It's the planned goals we do pretty well, but it's the unplanned goals that can really get you into trouble. Okay, so planned goals. Hey, we know what these are. They can be reasonably estimated. They may include, I want to fund a comfortable retirement. Now, one thing I want you to be careful of, though, my idea of a comfortable retirement might be different than my client. We need to be a little bit more specific about that. Also, they may want a primary or secondary residence. They may want a vacation home. There might be some secondary goals here that we have to think about. And, maybe we want to pay for the education for our children. Okay, so some more planned goals. Weddings, significant family events. My parents, one of the things that they did that I'll never forget, they brought in all my brothers and sisters from everywhere, and we all would go on vacation together every few years. That was fantastic. Or maybe there's some charitable giving. wealth transfer. Again, so all of these things are planned. These are goals that our clients give us. And more importantly, the CFA Institute is going to be very clear in the question what these planned goals are. But I want you to think about unplanned goals. And again, I want you to think about unexpected health costs and any type of repairs, expenses. For anyone that owns a home out there, is owning a home an American dream? Sometimes it's an American nightmare. My brother bought a home that had black mold in it that they didn't know. It made him and his family sick, and he ended up losing, I don't know, about 40% of the value on the home just to get out of it with their health. Okay, so these are unexpected financial expenditures, and they're very difficult to deal with because they're uncertain. So we don't know when they're going to happen, and we don't know how expensive they're going to be. So we have two problems to deal with here. So what are some examples? We talked about property repairs, and I really want you to zero on these unexpected medical expenses. So as you're going through the constructed response questions on private wealth, think about, are the couple in good health? Are they telling you they have health problems? Do they have a special needs child? Start thinking about and sort of keeping your eye open for these unexpected medical expenses because they can absolutely derail the portfolio. Okay, so how can you help, and what is your role as a private wealth manager in formulating these client goals? Well, I think the most important thing, you're going to quantify the goal. Don't tell me you want to fund a retirement. What does that mean? I want $50,000 after-tax income for the rest of my life. Okay, I understand you defined it. Well, is it realistic? You didn't start saving for your retirement until you were 60 and you have $20,000 in the bank. I'm not so sure that's realistic. Okay, so again, we want to quantify, but I think where we really bring in our value here, is it realistic? Heck, I wanted to play basketball for the Lakers. Apparently at 5'6" and overweight, I'm not a good candidate for that option. Okay, so let's move on to, again, prioritizing goals. What you're going to find, again, this is why I loved institutional much better than private wealth. Oftentimes, they're going to have conflicting goals. Hey, I want a comfortable retirement. I also want a vacation property. Oh, and I also want to pay for all the education for all my grandkids. Okay, so you as a wealth manager, in the question and in real life, you're going to have to figure out the priority of these goals. And then I'm going to go one step further. You need to use Monte Carlo simulation or the other tools that you're going to be taught to figure out what is the probability that you can meet these goals. Hey, guess what? You're in luck. There's only a 9% chance you're going to have to eat cat food in retirement. Are you okay with that? Your client might not be. Okay, so let's move on. Changing goals. This used to drive me absolutely crazy working with private wealth managers and even private clients. They're constantly changing the goals. Hey, you told me last year you didn't want to pay for your children's education. Now you do. And then you told me you're going to keep your house. Now you're talking about moving. These things change. You're going to have to change. And remember, if the goals change, you may have to modify that investment strategy. So these are not static. They're dynamic. Okay? So now we're going to deal, so we talked about the objectives, and we talked about that and trying to figure out these goals. Now we're going to get into risk tolerance. And again, if we're going to build portfolios, we need to understand what's acceptable risk that our clients can take. So again, and I can't stress this enough, you cannot talk about risk tolerance for private wealth clients without focusing on ability to bear risk and willingness to bear risk. We need both. Okay, absolutely imperative to have both. And you need to understand this risk tolerance to develop a suitable IPS. Guess what? I got your retirement goals. I know you didn't want small cap, and I know you didn't want emerging market Russian bonds in your portfolio, but I went ahead and did it anyway. And I violated our suitability agreements that we did, but guess what? Now you can retire early because I took all this great risk. Not appropriate. You're not going to do very well. Okay, so let's talk about the client's risk orientation. So we got a couple ways to do this. Again, I want you to zero in on ability to bear risk and willingness to bear risk. When you hear the word risk tolerance, you immediately go into ability to bear risk and willingness to bear risk. And you need to classify this a little bit. Is it above average? Is it average? Or is it below average? Okay, so we need to really define that. And again, for both ability and willingness, we need to define, are they above average, average, or below average? Now, the curriculum also points out that the opposite of risk tolerance is risk aversion. Okay, nice to know. Okay, so moving on, still risk tolerance. Risk capacity. This is really addressing this ability to bear risk. We're not talking about how you're worried about the stock market, how you're nervous about stock returns and the market fluctuations. We're really talking about what is your ability to bear risk. And I'm going to argue that that's pretty much determined by your time horizon and your liquidity and the priority. How important is it? Which goal is it that is the most important? So again, those are all going to determine your ability to bear risk. There's nothing in here about your emotional thoughts. This is just your capacity. Hey, just because you have an above average ability to bear risk, it doesn't mean you want to do that. So again, you still have to factor in willingness, but right now we're focusing on your capacity, which is determined pretty much by the time and liquidity, and then we also want to be aware of priorities. Okay, so moving on, the higher the risk capacity, the greater the client's ability to bear risk and sustain losses. But here's the key, without putting their goals in jeopardy. Okay, that's what ability to bear risk means. Can you reach your goal? If doing this is going to put your goal in jeopardy, that's not acceptable to the client, and you've got to clarify and help the client understand what they're doing. Okay, and I want you to think risk capacity, it's more objective compared to risk tolerance. Risk tolerance is emotions. It's kind of your attitude towards risk. So again, I want you to think about this idea of risk capacity versus risk tolerance. Okay, but again, don't get too hung up on here. Just realize risk capacity, they're really focusing on ability to bear risk, and we're really thinking of risk tolerance. We're focusing on both ability to bear risk and willingness to bear risk. Okay, risk perception. This is subjective. Guess what? This is going to change from one client to the next, and it's not static. What we find as clients get older, they get more risk averse. Hey, I've got money. I don't want to be rich. I just don't want to eat cat food. I don't want to be poor. Okay, so the question is going to dig down a little bit deeper. How does a client think about investment losses? Are they focused on absolute dollar amounts or percentages? Hey, you lost me $300,000 last year. That sounds bad, but what if that was only 1% of the portfolio and the overall broad market was down 5%? I did pretty well. So again, we've got to define what we're doing. And again, this risk perception is going to vary from client to client. Okay, so for the exam, ability to bear risk is decreased by, these are things that we're looking for. Shorter time horizon, why does that impact ability to bear risk? hey, you don't have the time to recover from a down market. Large critical goals in relation to the size. I want 70% of my portfolio to go to my alma mater. That's a critical goal, and that's a big part of the portfolio. That's going to lower the ability to bear risk. Goals that are important to the client or cannot be deferred. Hey, if this thing is rock solid, this is what you absolutely want no matter what, that is going to impact your ability to bear risk. And absolutely high liquidity needs. If you're taking 15% of the portfolio every year, your ability to bear risk is very low, very below average. Okay, so again, shorter time horizon, large critical goals, important goals, and high liquidity needs, those lower your ability to bear risk. Okay, so moving on, a few more. How about if the portfolio is the sole source of support? Or if there's an inability to lose value. Hey, I cannot lose more than, I don't want this portfolio to ever lose more than 0% or 5%. This impacts your ability to bear risk. Okay, so how do we evaluate this risk tolerance? So this is what I like you to think about. We have two really good tools. Questionnaires. A lot of people use questionnaires. I've used questionnaires. I would actually recommend that you do use questionnaires, but I don't want you to stop. This is sort of what the robo-advisors are doing out there. The questionnaires are part of it, but I want you to add one more thing, and I'm so glad to see this in the CFA material. Conversations. The questionnaire may not get to the heart of what the client really means, and the client can read those questionnaires wrong, and more importantly, they may not be consistent. And these things are not static, they might be dynamic. This morning they might have had a small fender bender, and their idea of risk is completely different, and in a few days it'll be completely different. Okay, this is the whole key. Conversations can yield additional information about these risk tolerances. So if the client tells you, my father was a gambler in the horse races, he lost a ton of money, my family's always been afraid of risk. You need to understand this. You need to understand past successes and failures. How successful have you been on your own? What have you tried? What have you done? And I need to know your financial background and experience. If you've never invested in the stock market before, I need you to understand that we're at the late innings of a bull market, and it's more likely the market's going to decline soon. How big of a decline can you handle? Can you handle a 50% peak to trough decline? If you can't, we've got to adjust that in the portfolio. Okay, so the last part of this section that I want you to think about is we're dealing with private clients' risk tolerance. Here's what's likely going to happen. Your client is going to have multiple financial goals. So you're going to have to determine that risk tolerance for each goal. And here's what we find. It's very likely that the client is going to have a low risk tolerance for more important goals, but higher risk tolerance for lower priority goals. So let me put this in perspective. If your number one concern is to make sure that you have a comfortable retirement, okay, that's number one. I have a very low risk tolerance for that goal. That has to happen. But I also want to give the most money I can to my alma mater. So what does that mean? Well, as long as you get me to my total retirement goal, I have a very low risk tolerance for that. I'm not giving you any leeway there. But hey, if you want to give some money to my alma mater, that's what I'd like to do. We'll work on that, but that is not the priority. So again, it's really important to help these clients understand the multiple financial goals, and I want you to think about how you can prioritize these goals And I want you to incorporate that these goals may have different risk tolerances.